The flight attendant's voice rose loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." Her words carried a sharp edge, her tone dripping with condescension. Naomi, the black woman, calm as ever, looked up at her. "I've already told you I'm not moving," she said simply. Her tone was even, almost soothing, but it held an undeniable strength. She was humiliated in front of everyone, but no one expected what would happen next when the woman they thought was powerless stood up and revealed who she really was. As we delve into the story, if you believe everyone should be treated with respect, no matter what their color is, click the subscribe button now and tell us where you are watching from. The plane gleamed under the afternoon sun, its sleek design promising a luxurious journey for its passengers. Inside, the cabin was nothing short of opulence: plush leather seats, gold accents, and an air of exclusivity that made everyone inside feel like royalty. Passengers moved with ease, their expensive luggage rolling behind them as they were ushered toward the sleek private jet waiting on the tarmac. Soon they settled into their spots, some scrolling through their devices, others sipping champagne offered by the attentive flight crew. Inside the plane, soft ambient music played in the background. Among them was Naomi Williams, a calm and composed woman in her late 30s. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer and matching slacks, Naomi exuded understated elegance. She moved with quiet confidence, though she made no effort to draw attention to herself. Naomi Williams stepped into the cabin, her calm presence drawing attention. Her steps were measured, and her gaze swept the cabin briefly before she moved toward her seat. Her destination wasn't just another trip. It was a journey to oversee her growing empire, though no one on board yet knew who she was. She preferred it that way, for now. Lauren, the lead flight attendant, stood near the entrance, her crisp uniform perfectly tailored. Her sharp features exuded control as she greeted the passengers one by one. Her smile was warm for some, colder for others. She prided herself on keeping order on the plane, though her idea of order often depended on how people looked or behaved. Lauren's welcoming tone shifted subtly as she greeted Naomi with a curt, "Welcome aboard," the warmth noticeably absent. Behind Naomi, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond sat. The couple, in their 60s, exuded the ease of seasoned travelers. Mrs. Raymond clutched a small knitting bag, her fingers already twitching to begin her work. Mr. Raymond carried a folded newspaper, his expression one of mild curiosity as he took in the scene. Lauren's smile brightened for them. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond. Lovely to have you with us again." Naomi glanced over her shoulder, noticing the stark contrast in Lauren's tone. Her expression remained calm, though her eyes reflected an awareness of the unspoken dynamics at play. As other passengers settled, Lauren moved through the cabin, ensuring everything was in place. She checked on the Raymond couple, offering them a bright smile. "Is there anything I can get for you before we take off?" Mrs. Raymond shook her head politely, already absorbed in her knitting. Mr. Raymond nodded toward his coffee, indicating he was satisfied. When Lauren passed Naomi, her demeanor shifted again. She glanced at Naomi's bag, resting neatly under the seat, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't offer the same courtesy or warmth, simply walking by without a word. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's attitude shifted based on appearances? Share your experience in the comments below and click on the subscribe button. Lauren Reed, in her early 40s, carried herself with the precision of someone who thrived on control. Her pristine uniform and perfectly coiffed hair matched her sharp demeanor. To Lauren, appearances mattered more than anything else, and her judgments were swift and unapologetic. Lauren's eyes narrowed as she watched Naomi settle in. Something about Naomi didn't sit right with her. Not her clothes, not her calm self-assurance, not the fact that she didn't immediately seek attention like many of the passengers Lauren deemed worthy of respect. In Lauren's mind, Naomi simply didn't belong. She approached Naomi with quick, purposeful strides, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her tone polite but dripping with condescension. "I think you're in the wrong section." Naomi glanced up at her, her expression calm. "I believe this is my seat," she replied, her voice steady. Lauren's smile didn't waver, but her tone sharpened. "I don't think so. This section is reserved for our elite passengers." Nearby, the other passengers began to notice the exchange. A nosy socialite leaned slightly to get a better view, her curiosity piqued. A friendly businessman across the aisle glanced over, frowning slightly at Lauren's tone. Naomi remained composed, her gaze steady as she replied, "You might want to double-check your passenger list before making assumptions." Lauren's eyebrows arched, her irritation barely hidden. "I don't need to check anything," she said sharply. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't." The tension in the cabin thickened. The passengers exchanged glances, whispering quietly to each other. Others, uncomfortable, pretended not to notice. One passenger muttered, "Why doesn't she just move if she's in the wrong seat?" Another shrugged. "She's probably trying to sneak in for a free upgrade." Lauren crossed her arms, standing her ground. "If you don't move to the back of the plane," she said, her voice loud enough for others to hear, "I'll have to call security." Naomi tilted her head slightly, her calm expression unwavering. "Call whoever you need to," she said, "but I'm not moving." The nosy socialite gasped softly. The businessman leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Lauren, now visibly frustrated, turned to the junior flight attendant, Grace, who stood nearby, watching nervously. "Grace," Lauren snapped, "escort her to the back now." Grace hesitated, glancing between Naomi and Lauren. She wanted to speak up, to say something about checking the passenger list, as Naomi had suggested, but Lauren's sharp glare froze her in place. Reluctantly, she nodded and stepped forward. Naomi shifted slightly in her seat, her calm demeanor still intact. "You might want to think carefully about what you're doing," she said softly, her words carrying more weight than Lauren realized. Lauren scoffed, waving off the warning. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said. "Now get up." What would you do if someone treated you like this on a flight? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're loving this story so far, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. Lauren's tone grew sharper as she gestured toward the back of the plane. "You're not supposed to be here," she said again, her voice now tinged with impatience. The passengers watched in stunned silence, the tension crackling in the air like static. Naomi leaned back slightly, her gaze steady on Lauren. "You shouldn't make assumptions about people," she said quietly. Lauren's smirk widened. "And you shouldn't be in seats you didn't pay for." The cliffhanger came as Naomi finally picked up her phone, her calm expression unchanging. She typed something quickly, then set it back down on the armrest. "You're making a mistake," she said simply, her words hanging in the air. Lauren didn't listen. "We'll see about that," she muttered, gesturing again for Grace to act. The junior attendant stepped closer, her hesitation palpable as the scene continued to unfold. Lauren's irritation only grew as Naomi remained seated, her quiet confidence a stark contrast to Lauren's increasingly flustered demeanor. The tension in the cabin thickened with every passing moment, drawing the attention of nearby passengers who watched the exchange with curiosity and disbelief. Lauren's voice rose loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." Her words carried a sharp edge, her tone dripping with condescension. Naomi, calm as ever, looked up at Lauren. "I've already told you, I'm not moving." she said simply. Her tone was even, almost soothing, but it held an undeniable strength that only infuriated Lauren further. A woman ahead, a nosy socialite with perfectly coiffed hair and an air of entitlement, leaned toward her companion. She whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Looks like she's trying to sneak in for a free ride." Lauren seized on the comment, her smirk returning. "That's exactly what it looks like," she said, folding her arms and turning to the other passengers as though rallying support. "We have rules for a reason. Some people just don't respect them." Naomi didn't respond to the insults or the growing murmurs around her. Instead, she kept her gaze steady on Lauren, her composure a quiet defiance that spoke louder than any word. Grace hesitated, then took a step toward the passenger list clipped near the cockpit door. Her fingers trembled as she scanned the names, hoping to find something that would help Naomi. But before she could say anything, Lauren snapped, "Grace, what are you doing?" Grace turned, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just checking." "I've got this under control," Lauren interrupted, her tone sharp. "You don't need to get involved." Grace stepped back, her face flushing with embarrassment. She bit her lip, torn between doing what she knew was right and the fear of losing her job. As the tension built, a kindly-looking man seated across the aisle leaned forward. The businessman, dressed in a crisp suit and exuding a calm demeanor, smiled at Naomi. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Is everything all right?" Naomi turned to him, her expression softening. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, her voice steady but grateful for the small act of kindness. Before the businessman could say more, Lauren interjected, her tone accusing. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage the disturbance." She turned back to Naomi, pointing a finger at her. "You're causing a scene." The businessman frowned. "From where I'm sitting," he said calmly. "You're the one making a scene." Lauren's face flushed with anger, and she turned her attention back to Naomi. "I've had enough of this," she snapped. "Either you move, or I'll make sure you're escorted off this plane." Naomi met her gaze without flinching. "You can try," she said softly. Lauren's frustration boiled over. Her voice shook as she leaned closer to Naomi. "Why don't you just admit you're in the wrong seat and stop wasting everyone's time?" Naomi remained silent, her calmness only fueling Lauren's anger. Lauren finally left Naomi alone and turned to carry out her other duties. Angrily, Lauren moved briskly down the aisle, her polished shoes clicking softly on the carpet. She carried a tray of sparkling water, her demeanor professional but her expression tight with irritation. Naomi sat quietly in her seat, her attention focused on the book in her hands. Passengers chatted softly, the atmosphere calm until Lauren's subtle hostility began to surface. Naomi had been waiting patiently for a drink, watching as Lauren served Mr. and Mrs. Raymond first, then moved to others in the back. Lauren, however, made no effort to acknowledge Naomi. The tray was nearly empty when Naomi finally spoke, her tone gentle. "Excuse me, could I have some water, please?" Lauren paused, glancing at Naomi with a dismissive look. "I'll get to you when I can," she said curtly, walking past without another word. Naomi's calm gaze followed Lauren's retreating figure, but she remained silent. "What would you do if you noticed this kind of behavior? Would you step in or stay quiet? Let us know in the comments below." Minutes passed, and Naomi shifted in her seat, trying to find a more comfortable position. She stretched one leg slightly into the aisle, her movement unassuming. Lauren returned, tray in hand, her sharp eyes catching the small adjustment. Instead of asking Naomi to move her leg, Lauren deliberately changed her path. In an instant, Lauren's foot struck Naomi's leg. The tray tilted, and the glasses of water tumbled forward, splashing onto Naomi's lap and the floor. Lauren gasped theatrically, her voice sharp and loud. "Watch where you're putting your legs. You've caused a mess." Passengers turned their heads, startled by the commotion. Naomi looked up, startled but composed. Her hands brushed at the water on her trousers. She said calmly, "But you walked into my leg." Naomi tilted her head slightly, her calm gaze unwavering. "I've only asked to be treated with the same respect as everyone else," she replied. "And if that's too much to ask, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The words hung in the air, a quiet yet powerful rebuke. Lauren's face flushed with anger. She stepped closer, her frustration boiling over. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she hissed, her voice sharp. Then, in a shocking moment, unable to contain herself, Lauren raised her hand and slapped Naomi across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin, sharp and shocking, like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the passengers. The businessman stood halfway, his face a mix of disbelief and anger. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Even the nosy socialite appeared taken aback, her previous smirk replaced by a look of unease. Naomi slowly straightened, her hand resting calmly on her lap. Her expression remained composed, her gaze steady as she looked up at Lauren. The cabin was silent, the tension palpable. Naomi now straightened in her seat, kept her expression unchanged, but her eyes carried a weight that made Lauren hesitate for the first time. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Naomi said quietly, her voice calm but cutting through the air like a knife. "What would you do if you were in Naomi's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story has you hooked, hit like and subscribe now." Naomi looked up at Lauren, her voice steady and composed. "I've been patient with you, but your behavior has crossed the line," she said, her words deliberate and firm. Lauren's expression darkened, her jaw tightened, and her hands clenched at her sides. "Crossed the line?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You're the one who's been disruptive since you got on this plane." Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't touch her face or respond in kind. Instead, she slowly straightened her posture, her gaze fixed firmly on Lauren. Her calm demeanor remained intact, even in the face of such blatant aggression. "You'll regret that," Naomi said softly, her voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to fill the entire cabin. Lauren faltered for a moment, her confidence shaken by Naomi's unyielding composure, but she quickly recovered, scoffing loudly. "Regret it?" she sneered. "What are you going to do? Call the police?" Naomi didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes, and the passengers could feel the shift in power. From the corner of the cabin, Grace, the younger flight attendant, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and determination. She had been quietly observing Lauren's behavior all day, her discomfort growing with every passing moment. Now she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Discreetly, Grace stepped away from the commotion and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number quickly, her fingers trembling slightly. When the call connected, her voice was hushed but firm. "It's Grace," she said. "We have a situation on the plane." Grace returned to her post, her face a mix of worry and determination. Lauren, oblivious to the call, stood with her arms crossed, her anger simmering but her authority waning. Naomi remained seated, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Lauren's rage. Passengers continued to watch, their eyes darting between Naomi and Lauren, unsure of what would happen next. One of them leaned toward Naomi, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" she asked, her concern genuine. Naomi turned to her, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine," she said softly. The tension in the cabin was palpable, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the plane's engines. It was clear that the situation was far from over. Naomi remained seated, her posture steady despite the water dripping onto her clothing. She looked at Lauren, her voice calm but firm. "All you had to do was treat me with respect. But you failed because of your prejudice, thinking I don't belong here just because you feel so." Lauren's irritation deepened. Her grip on the tray tightened as she leaned closer, her tone mocking. "Respect? Maybe you should earn it first. People like you don't deserve my respect." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers exchanged glances, some shifting in their seats, unsure of how to react. The unspoken question lingered in the air. How far would this go? At this point, Naomi's anger rose. "You shouldn't have said that," Naomi said, her voice sharp but firm. Her words carried an unspoken weight, leaving everyone in the cabin wondering what would happen next. Lauren folded her arms, her anger still simmering. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "I've been more than patient with you. Maybe now you'll understand that actions have consequences." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly, her calm demeanor still unbroken. "You're right," she said softly, her words deliberate. "Actions do have consequences, and you're about to find out just how true that is." For a moment, Lauren faltered. Something in Naomi's tone sent a chill down her spine, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. "I'm not afraid of your empty threats," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You're the one who will regret this, not me." Lauren turned away, feigning confidence. But deep inside, unease began to creep in. She had crossed a line, and though she wouldn't admit it, she knew it. The looks from the passengers, the horrified expression on Grace's face, and Naomi's quiet composure, it all made Lauren feel as though the walls were closing in. She tried to shake it off, but her thoughts raced. What if this woman isn't who I think she is? The way Naomi carried herself, the way she spoke with such calm authority, it didn't match Lauren's assumptions. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced her anger. Lauren's unease grew stronger as she replayed the moment in her mind. Why didn't she yell or fight back? Why did she say I'd regret it? Her stomach twisted as the realization hit her. She had let her prejudice and anger take over, and now she could smell trouble coming. Lauren glanced around the cabin, hoping to find some support, but the passengers were no longer on her side. The businessman glared at her, his arms crossed in silent judgment. The nosy socialite whispered to her companion, shaking her head disapprovingly. Grace looked like she wanted to disappear, her hands trembling as she clutched the passenger list. Naomi, meanwhile, remained seated, her expression calm but unreadable. She crossed her legs slowly, leaning back in her seat with a quiet confidence that made Lauren's unease grow deeper. Naomi didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't have to act out. Her silence said everything Lauren didn't want to hear. The tension in the cabin thickened as Lauren tried to regain control of the situation, but no matter what she said or did, she couldn't shake the feeling that her actions would soon catch up to her. Naomi's words echoed in her mind. "You're making a mistake." Unbeknownst to Lauren, Naomi had already sent a message, and her quiet response to the slap wasn't submission, it was strategy. Trouble was brewing, and Lauren was about to find out just how big of a mistake she had made. What do you think Naomi should do next? Let us know in the comments. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. The tension in the cabin was thick, with Lauren pacing back and forth near Naomi's seat, her frustration bubbling over. Naomi remained seated, calm and composed, as though the situation wasn't affecting her at all. But deep down, Lauren could feel the weight of her actions pressing in on her. Naomi, without a word, reached for her phone. Her movements were deliberate, and she typed something quickly before setting the device on the armrest beside her. The gesture seemed simple, but it carried an unspoken power that made Lauren glance uneasily at the phone. "What do you think you're doing?" Lauren asked, her voice sharp. Naomi didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her calm demeanor unwavering. "You'll find out soon enough," she said softly, her words carrying a weight that made Lauren's unease deepen. If you think Lauren's reaction was uncalled for, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The cabin fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the plane's engines. Passengers exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. The nosy socialite leaned toward her companion, her voice barely a whisper. "What's going on? Do you think she's someone important?" The businessman across the aisle sat quietly, a knowing look on his face. He tapped his fingers against the armrest, his gaze fixed on Naomi as though he had pieced together something no one else had. Minutes later, the sound of footsteps came from the front of the cabin. The cockpit door opened and the pilot stepped out, his face pale and his expression tight. He scanned the room briefly before walking directly toward Lauren, his movements quick and deliberate. Lauren turned to him, her irritation evident. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone sharp. The pilot stopped in front of her, his posture tense. "You need to step aside," he said, his voice firm but laced with discomfort. Lauren frowned, her confusion evident. "Excuse me," she said, crossing her arms. "Why would I need to step aside? I'm handling this." The pilot's gaze flicked to Naomi, then back to Lauren. "I just received a call from management that the owner of the plane is on board, and she's Miss Williams here," he said, pointing to Naomi. His words hit the room like a thunderclap. The cabin erupted into gasps and murmurs. The nosy socialite audibly inhaled, her eyes widening as she looked back and forth between Naomi and Lauren. "She owns the plane," she whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. The businessman nodded knowingly, his expression calm. "I had a feeling," he muttered under his breath, as though the revelation confirmed what he had suspected all along. Grace, standing near the galley, froze in place. Relief washed over her face as the realization hit her. Naomi wasn't just another passenger. She was someone far more powerful than anyone had realized. Lauren, meanwhile, stared at the pilot, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "That can't be true," she stammered, her voice losing its usual sharpness. "There must be some mistake." The tension on the plane was palpable, the silence only broken by the hum of the engines. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, the memory of the slap still fresh in their minds. Lauren stood near the aisle, her arms crossed, her defiance evident despite the growing discomfort around her. Naomi remained seated, calm and composed, her posture as poised as ever. Then, without warning, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing. Please remain seated and prepare for descent." Passengers murmured in confusion. The businessman leaned toward Naomi, whispering, "What's happening? Why are we landing?" Naomi didn't answer, her expression serene but unreadable. Lauren's brow furrowed, her confidence faltering as she glanced nervously toward the front of the cabin. The plane touched down smoothly, and moments later, a sleek black SUV pulled up directly to the tarmac. The doors opened, and two sharply dressed assistants stepped out, their movements brisk and purposeful. They ascended the plane steps with quiet authority, their presence commanding attention the moment they entered the cabin. "Miss Williams," one of them said warmly, their voice respectful, "everything is ready for your review." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Lauren froze, her face draining of color as the realization hit her like a wave. "Miss Williams," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The assistants ignored her, their focus entirely on Naomi. "Do you need anything before we proceed?" one of them asked, their tone deferential. Naomi stood slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. She adjusted her blazer, her calm demeanor radiating power. The passengers watched in stunned silence as Naomi finally spoke, her voice steady and commanding. "I'm Naomi Williams," she began, her gaze sweeping across the cabin. "I'm the owner of this plane, and I'm also the owner of this airline." Lauren's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The confident, condescending flight attendant was now a pale shadow of herself, her earlier bravado replaced by sheer panic. Naomi turned her attention to Lauren, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Lauren, your behavior today has been nothing short of disgraceful," she said, her words cutting through the silence. "You've humiliated yourself, mistreated a passenger, and tarnished the reputation of this airline." Lauren stammered, her voice trembling. I didn't know." Naomi held up a hand, silencing her. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to treat me with the respect that every passenger deserves," she said firmly. "Instead, you made assumptions. You acted with prejudice, and you escalated a situation that could have been handled with basic decency." The passengers nodded in agreement, their earlier silence giving way to murmurs of support. Mr. Raymond folded his newspaper neatly, giving Naomi an approving nod. Naomi finally stood, her movements deliberate and controlled. She straightened her blazer and looked directly at Lauren, her gaze calm but commanding. "There's no mistake in your actions, Lauren," she said. Her tone was quiet, yet it carried an authority that silenced the entire cabin. Lauren's eyes darted around the room, searching for someone to back her up, but no one came to her defense. The passengers watched silently, some with their phones discreetly raised, recording every moment. Naomi took a step closer to Lauren, her voice steady. "While you were busy judging me," she began, "you failed to do your job. Your job is to treat every passenger with respect, no matter who they are or what you assume about them. And now there are consequences." Lauren's hands clenched at her sides, her mind racing. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, and for the first time her confidence faltered completely. Naomi gestured to the pilot. "I want this addressed immediately," she said, "and I want to ensure that this doesn't happen again to anyone." The pilot nodded, his demeanor professional. "Understood, Miss Williams," he said. Lauren took a step back, her mind swirling with panic. She looked toward the exit, her instincts screaming at her to leave before things got worse. But before she could make a move, the pilot stepped in her path, his expression firm. "You're not going anywhere," he said. Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "Lauren, your actions today have proven that you are unfit for this position. Effective immediately, you are fired." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Lauren's face crumpled and she took a step back, her confidence completely shattered. "Please, Miss Williams," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean—" Naomi's expression hardened. "You didn't mean to get caught," she said coldly. "But you did, and now you'll face the consequences." At that moment, 2 uniformed police officers boarded the plane, their presence causing a wave of murmurs among the passengers. Lauren's face turned ashen as they approached. "Miss Williams," one of the officers said respectfully, "we received your report. Are you pressing charges?" Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "Yes," she said firmly. "This individual assaulted me in front of multiple witnesses. I expect her to be held accountable." Lauren gasped, taking a step back. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding," she cried, her voice desperate. "I didn't mean to—" The officer stepped forward, one producing a pair of handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault," the officer said. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Lauren's breathing quickened as she realized there was no way out. Her gaze flicked to Naomi, who stood calm and composed, her presence a stark contrast to Lauren's unraveling demeanor. Trouble had arrived, and Lauren knew she couldn't escape it. This was only the beginning of her reckoning. Passengers watched in stunned silence as Lauren's hands were cuffed behind her back. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to protest. "Please, Miss Williams, I'm sorry," she sobbed. Naomi's expression remained impassive. "Your apology means nothing without accountability," she said quietly. "You made your choices. Now you'll face the consequences." The passengers watched silently, their eyes fixed on Lauren as she disappeared down the aisle. The once dominant flight attendant was now a defeated figure, her arrogance replaced by regret and humiliation. Naomi turned back to the cabin, her voice steady as she addressed the passengers. "To everyone here, I apologize for what you had to witness today. This is not the standard of service I expect on my planes. Moving forward, we will ensure that every passenger is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." The cabin erupted into applause, passengers clapping enthusiastically. Mr. Raymond gave a small cheer, while Mrs. Raymond set her knitting aside to clap politely. Naomi turned to Grace, the younger flight attendant who had quietly supported her throughout the ordeal. "Grace," Naomi said, her tone softening, "I noticed your professionalism today. Thank you for stepping up when it mattered. You'll be hearing from my office about a promotion." Grace's eyes widened and she nodded quickly, her face lighting up with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Williams," she said softly. Naomi smiled briefly before stepping toward the exit, her assistant following closely behind. The plane's atmosphere had shifted completely, the earlier tension replaced by admiration and relief. Justice had been served, and Naomi had set an example that no one on that flight would forget. Do you think Lauren deserves forgiveness, or should she face the consequences of her actions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Passengers smiled at the interaction, the warmth of the moment spreading through the cabin. The nosy woman who had watched the entire ordeal with wide-eyed fascination leaned forward in her seat. "Miss Williams, you're amazing," she blurted out, her admiration shining brightly. Naomi turned toward her, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Thank you," she replied. "Remember this moment. It's always worth standing up for what's right." As Naomi stepped off the plane, the fresh air of the tarmac greeted her. The black SUV waited patiently, its driver holding the door open. Her assistants walked beside her, briefing her on her next meeting. But Naomi's thoughts lingered on the events of the day. Later, in a televised interview, Naomi sat in a sleek studio, her demeanor as poised as ever. The interviewer leaned forward, clearly captivated. "Miss Williams, your story has gone viral. Millions of people have seen how you handled this situation. What message do you want to send?" Naomi's gaze was steady as she answered, her voice clear and resolute. "Respect is a right, not a privilege," she said. "Everyone deserves dignity no matter how they look, where they come from, or what others assume about them. True leadership is about setting that standard and ensuring it's upheld." The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. "And what would you say to those who face similar challenges but don't have the platform you do?" Naomi's expression softened. "I'd say that strength comes from within. Even when you feel invisible, remember your worth. You don't need a title or wealth to demand respect. You just need to stand firm in who you are." A few weeks later, Naomi boarded another flight, this time greeted by a different crew. The energy was warm, welcoming, and professional. The lead flight attendant greeted her with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Williams. It's an honor to have you." Naomi returned the smile as she settled into her seat. The atmosphere felt lighter, the service impeccable. But more importantly, it was filled with respect. As she gazed out the window, watching the runway blur into the sky, a sense of peace washed over her. The events of that day had left a lasting impact, not just on the passengers and crew who had witnessed it, but on everyone who had seen the story unfold. Naomi knew that her actions had turned an injustice into a lesson, one that would ripple far beyond that single flight. She smiled, knowing that sometimes the most powerful victories weren't about winning. They were about inspiring change. As the passengers settled into their seats, Naomi quietly reached for her phone. In the aftermath of what had unfolded, she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about changing a system that allowed prejudice and assumptions to thrive. As the jet climbed higher into the clouds, Naomi settled into her seat at the front of the plane. The window beside her framed a breathtaking view of the horizon, the world below fading into a sea of blue and white. She gazed out at the endless sky, a sense of peace washing over her. This wasn't just about confronting prejudice or asserting her authority. It was about turning a moment of humiliation into a powerful lesson, one that would ripple far beyond this single flight. Naomi smiled to herself, her reflection faintly visible in the window. She knew this was just the beginning. With every decision, every policy, and every act of leadership, she was shaping a future where respect and kindness were the standard, not the exception. The plane soared higher, the engines humming softly as it moved toward its destination, and Naomi, seated at the helm of her vision, felt a quiet triumph that no turbulence could ever shake. In a public statement released shortly after the flight, Naomi spoke directly to the world, her words carrying a message that resonated far beyond the confines of the jet. "Luxury isn't about appearances," she said in a heartfelt video that quickly went viral. "It's about the experience we create for everyone. True success is measured not by what you can afford, but by how you treat others. This is why I'm implementing new policies across my airline to ensure that every passenger, no matter who they are, feels valued and respected." The statement sparked conversations across social media, with people applauding Naomi's leadership and her commitment to change. Hashtags like "Respect Above All" and "Naomi's Vision" trended for days, inspiring others to reflect on their own behavior and biases. If you love the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share it with those around you.